At 17, kicked out with his younger sister, a young man inherited a worthless, condemned workshop. But what he found sealed beneath its floor would force him to confront a 50-year-old secret and choose between running from his family's past or fighting for its future. If you've ever been told you have no options, this story is for you. Stick with us and maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about what happens when you finally find one. The moment it happened feels frozen in my memory, like a photograph taken with a cheap, unforgiving flash. It was my 17th birthday. The air had that particular November dampness that seeps right through your jacket and settles in your bones. My sister, Maya, was sitting on our one good suitcase on the curb, her 14-year-old shoulders hunched against the chill. I was standing. I felt like if I sat down, I'd never get back up. Our worldly possessions were in 3 black trash bags next to her. A car door slammed, and Ms. Albright, from the Department of Family Services, walked towards us, her sensible heels making sharp, clinical clicks on the wet pavement. She wasn't a bad person. She was just a tired person, working in a system that ran on exhaustion. She held a manila envelope, the edges softened from a long life in a filing cabinet. "Leo," she said, her voice flat. "This is it. I've called every placement on my list. There's nothing. You're 17. In 12 months, you're on your own anyway. The system considers you difficult." Difficult. It was their word for quiet, for not wanting to talk about things, for having a sister you refused to be separated from. "What about Maya?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant. She looked at Maya, and for the first time, a flicker of something uncomfortable crossed her face. "We'll find something for Maya. A group home, probably." I felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the old fear, the one that lived in the back of my throat. Me and Maya, we were a unit. It had been the one non-negotiable rule of our lives since our parents were gone. "No," I said. It was quiet, but it was absolute. Ms. Albright sighed, a long, weary exhalation of bureaucratic patience. "Leo, don't make this harder. You don't have any other cards to play." She pushed the manila envelope into my hands. It was surprisingly heavy. "This is the last thing. It's not a solution. Frankly, it's a liability." I looked down at the faded typewritten label. It was my name, and an address I'd never seen before, in a town I'd never heard of. "Your maternal grandfather," she explained, already turning back to her car. "He passed away years ago, before your parents. Left you this. It's a workshop, some land. It's also, according to the county records, condemned. Hasn't had taxes paid on it in a decade. It's scheduled for seizure and auction in less than a month. You can't live there. It's not legally habitable. But it's yours. Or it will be until the county takes it." She got in her car. She looked at me through the window. Her expression was one of professional pity. It was the look of someone closing a file. "The bus station is 6 blocks that way. There's a bus that leaves for that area at 7 p.m. What you do is your own business now, Leo. You're no longer my case." The car pulled away, spraying a fan of grimy water that landed just short of my feet. I stood there, holding the envelope. It felt like a joke, a cruel, cosmic joke. Kicked out on my birthday and handed the deed to a ruin. Maya looked up at me, her eyes wide and dark. "Leo, what do we do?" I looked from her small, trusting face to the trash bags, to the disappearing taillights of the only world we knew. I looked at the envelope. It wasn't a card to play, Ms. Albright had said. It was a liability. But it was the only thing we had. It was the only thing in the entire world with our name on it. I tucked the envelope inside my jacket, the corner digging into my ribs. "We catch a bus," I said. The social services office was the same color as despair, a pale, institutional beige that seemed to absorb light and hope in equal measure. We'd sat in those hard plastic chairs more times than I could count. Ms. Albright's office was no different, just with the added bonus of a dying plant in the corner and a stack of files that seemed to lean towards her, threatening to bury her. She had laid it all out for us an hour before we found ourselves on the curb. She spoke in a calm, practiced monotone that was supposed to be reassuring, but only made everything sound more final. "The foster placement has terminated your contract, effective today," she'd said, not looking at me, but at a form on her desk. "Mrs. Gable cited irreconcilable differences." Irreconcilable differences meant I'd called her out for taking Maya's birthday money. It meant I didn't smile enough. It meant we ate our meals in our room because the silence was better than the forced conversation at her dinner table. "You understand what this means, Leo. You're almost of age. The options for you are limited. The options for you and Maya together are non-existent." I remember staring at the water stain on the ceiling, a faint brown map of some forgotten flood. I traced its borders with my eyes, focusing on that instead of the precipice we were standing on. Maya was fidgeting with a loose thread on her sleeve. She was trying to be small, to be invisible. It was a skill we had both perfected. "There has to be something," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "A shelter? Anything?" Ms. Albright steepled her fingers. It was a gesture I think she'd seen in a movie, meant to convey thoughtful authority. "The shelters are full, and they would separate you. Maya would go into the youth system, you would go into the adult system. That's the procedure." The procedure. The system. It was a machine, and we were just components that no longer fit. She saw the look on my face, the hard line I was drawing inside myself. She was the one who finally broke eye contact. She reached into a drawer and pulled out that old manila envelope. "Look," she said, her voice softening for a moment. "I'm not supposed to do this. This was just a loose end in your family file. It's from the probate court, dated 15 years ago. It's been sitting here forever." She slid it across the desk. I didn't touch it. It felt like a trap. "Your grandfather, Robert Miller. He owned a property, a business, I think. When he died, it passed to your mother. When she passed, the title fell to you and your sister as her only heirs. But you were minors, wards of the state. So it just sat. In a file. In a drawer. Here." I finally picked it up. The paper was thick, important feeling. "So we own it?" Maya whispered, a tiny spark of hope in her voice. Ms. Albright held up a hand. "Don't get excited. I did a cursory check this morning. The property's in a rural county, population next to nothing. The building on it was condemned by the County Board of Health 6 years ago for structural instability. More importantly, there are 10 years of back taxes owed. The total is significant." She named a number that might as well have been $1 million. "The county has a lien on the property. They've filed for seizure. The auction is scheduled for December 15th, in less than 4 weeks. So no, you don't really own it. The state of North Carolina does. You just have the piece of paper that says you used to." She leaned back, her duty done. The brief flicker of humanity was gone, replaced by the weary pragmatist. "It's a ghost, a paper trail to a dead end. I'm only giving it to you because I am legally obligated to clear your file. It's not a home. It's not a resource. Do you understand?" I understood. I understood that the system had given up. We were being released, not into freedom, but into nothingness. We were being handed a memory of a grandfather we'd never known, and the deed to his failure. I stood up and Maya followed, a shadow at my side. I held the envelope. It was heavy with the weight of taxes and condemnation and failure, but it was also the first thing that had ever been truly ours. A failed inheritance was still an inheritance. It was a name and a place. It was a direction, And when you have nothing, a direction is everything. As we walked out of that beige office for the last time, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the panic was gone. The endless waiting was over. The wondering what would happen next was over. This was happening. We were on our own. The system had finally, officially, let go. And I was holding the only thread we had left. The bus groaned its way out of the city, its diesel engine a rattling, wheezing complaint against the cold night. The sodium lights of the city streets smeared against the rain-streaked windows, first bright and overwhelming, then less frequent, then gone entirely, replaced by a profound, inky blackness. We were the only passengers going all the way to the end of the line. The few others who had boarded with us got off in sprawling suburbs, then smaller towns, disappearing into warm-looking houses with lights in the windows. Each stop felt like another tether being cut. Maya had fallen asleep against my shoulder, her breathing soft and even. In sleep, the worry fell away from her face, and she just looked like a kid. A kid I was now solely responsible for. I felt a surge of terror so sharp it was almost physical. I was 17. I had $94 in my pocket and a piece of paper for a condemned building. What kind of plan was this? It wasn't a plan. It was an act of desperation. It was the only direction to run that wasn't a dead end. I stared out the window into the darkness. My own reflection stared back. A pale, grim face I barely recognized. I thought about our parents. The memories were blurry, like old photographs left out in the sun. I remembered my dad's hands, how they were always stained with grease but could fix anything. I remembered my mom's laugh, a sound like wind chimes. They died when I was 7, Maya 5. A car accident on a rainy night, they'd told us. A tragic, simple story. After that, it was the system. A succession of homes, some less bad than others, none of them permanent. We learned to pack light. We learned to not get attached. We learned to rely only on each other. My grandfather, Robert Miller, was just a name. He died before them. We had no pictures of him, no stories. He was a non-entity, a footnote in our tragic family history. Now, this ghost was our only hope. The bus driver, a heavy man with a kind, tired face, glanced at us in the rearview mirror. "Almost there, kids," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Coldwater Creek. Not much of a place to be heading in the middle of the night." "It's where we need to be," I said, trying to make it sound like a choice. He just nodded, as if he'd heard it all before. The bus finally pulled over on the side of a 2-lane highway. There was no station, just a gravel shoulder and a single, flickering street lamp casting a sickly yellow glow on a battered green sign that read, Coldwater Creek, population 412. The driver opened the door, letting in a blast of frigid, pine-scented air. "This is it," he said. "Town's about a mile down that road. Be careful." I gently shook Maya awake. She blinked, disoriented. "Are we here?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Yeah," I said, grabbing our trash bags. "We're here." We stepped off the bus into a silence so complete it felt like it had weight. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking into the darkness until they vanished, leaving us utterly alone. The world was just the circle of weak light from the lamp, the dark ribbon of the road, and the vast, starless sky above. The cold was a living thing. It bit at any exposed skin, sharp and immediate. I could see my breath, a white plume in the yellow light. Maya shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter. I handed her one of the bags. "Come on," I said, my voice sounding small in the immense quiet. "Let's go find it." We started walking. The road was cracked asphalt, slick with a thin layer of frost. On either side, the dark shapes of trees crowded in, their bare branches like skeletal fingers against the sky. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. Every snap of a twig in the woods sounded like a footstep. I had the crumpled directions from Ms. Albright's envelope in my hand. Miller's Garage, 1415 Old Timber Road. It was supposed to be at the far edge of town. We walked for what felt like hours. The miles stretched into an eternity. Finally, we saw the faint glow of a few streetlights ahead. Coldwater Creek. It wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A few dark storefronts, a gas station with its lights off, a single blinking traffic light at an empty intersection. It was a place that time seemed to have forgotten. We followed the signs for Old Timber Road, which quickly devolved from paved to gravel. The houses grew farther apart, then disappeared altogether. We were walking back into the woods. And then we saw it. Set back from the road, half swallowed by overgrown brush, was a long, low building. Its metal roof sagged in the middle like a broken back. Most of the windows were boarded over, and the ones that weren't were dark, shattered eyes. A large, faded sign hung at a crazy angle over the two big garage doors. The letters were peeling, but I could still make them out. Miller's Auto and Machine. This was it, our inheritance, our sanctuary. It looked like a tomb. Maya stopped, her grip on the bag tightening. "Leo, it's—" "I know," I said, my heart sinking. It was worse than I'd imagined. So much worse. I walked up the cracked driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. The main door was padlocked, the chain thick with rust. I gave it a pull. It didn't budge. We were locked out of our own ruin. A wave of hopelessness washed over me. It was a stupid plan, a desperate, childish fantasy. We were going to freeze to death on the doorstep of a building that was already dead. There was a moment where I just stood there, staring at the rust-eaten padlock. It felt like a final insult, the universe laughing at us. We had come all this way, spent nearly half our money on a one-way ticket to the middle of nowhere, only to be defeated by a chunk of oxidized metal. Maya's teeth were chattering, not just from the cold now, but from fear. I could feel her despair rolling off her in waves. It was that feeling, more than the cold, that finally broke me out of my paralysis. I couldn't give up, not with her watching me, not when I was all she had. "Okay," I said, forcing a confidence I didn't feel. "Plan B." I walked around the side of the building, my boots sinking into the muddy, leaf-strewn ground. The walls were corrugated metal, streaked with rust and grime. I ran my gloved hands along them, searching for any weakness. Near the back corner, one of the boarded-up windows had rotted through. The plywood was soft and pulpy. I wedged my fingers into a crack and pulled. The wood splintered, then broke away in a damp, crumbling chunk. The hole was small, but it was a start. I tore at the edges, ignoring the splinters digging into my fingers, until it was big enough to squeeze through. "I'm going in," I told Maya. "Stay here. I'll come open the front door." I hoisted myself up and through the opening, landing with a thud on the other side. The air inside was thick and stagnant, heavy with the smell of old oil, cold metal, and something else. Something like time itself. It was pitch black. I fumbled for the cheap flashlight I'd bought at a gas station. I clicked it on. The narrow beam cut a weak path through the darkness, revealing a world frozen in place. Dust lay like a shroud over everything. Massive workbenches lined the walls, covered in the ghostly shapes of tools. A heavy engine block hung from a chain hoist in the center of the room, motionless, like a great metal heart that had stopped beating decades ago. The floor was a patchwork of stained concrete and dark, oil-soaked wood. I picked my way through the clutter, my flashlight beam dancing over old calendars from the 1990s, coffee mugs with faded logos, a spectral landscape of a life abruptly stopped. I found the front door. The lock was a heavy deadbolt, operated by a thumb turn on the inside. It was stiff, but with a grunt of effort, I forced it open. The door groaned on its hinges, and Maya was standing there, a small silhouette against the gray pre-dawn light. She stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took it all in. "It's big," she whispered. That was one word for it. It was a cavern of forgotten things. We spent the next hour just exploring, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. There was a small office in the corner, a desk buried under piles of yellowed invoices and technical manuals. A rotary phone sat on the corner, coated in dust. In the back, a smaller room held a cot with a threadbare mattress, a small sink, and a hot plate. This must have been where he slept sometimes, I thought. We decided this back room would be our base. It was the smallest, most defensible space. We used an old, stiff tarp to cover the broken window. We swept a clear space on the floor and laid down our bags. It wasn't much, but it was inside. It was out of the wind. As the sun came up, weak winter light filtered through the grimy, unboarded windows, illuminating the vast space. The scale of the decay was overwhelming. But underneath the dust and the rust, I could see something else. I could see the bones of the place. The workbenches were made of thick, heavy timber. The tools, though rusted, were high quality. This wasn't a hobbyist's garage. This was a serious place of work, built to last. We spent the day in a numb haze of activity. We found a broom and swept 50 years of dust and grime into huge piles. We wiped down the desk in the office. We found a stack of old rags and cleaned the sink. It was pointless, Sisyphean work, but it was better than sitting still. It was better than thinking. Late in the afternoon, I was sweeping near the central workbench when my boot caught on something. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the bench. I looked down. A single floorboard, wider than the others, was raised up by half an inch. I nudged it with my toe. It was loose. Curiosity piqued, I knelt down. I pried at the edge with my fingers. The wood was old and dry, and it lifted up easily. Beneath it wasn't dirt or a crawl space, but a solid slab of concrete. And set into the concrete was something that made my heart stop. It was a dark rectangle of steel, about 3 feet by 4 feet. In the center was a recessed dial, like a safe, and a heavy, unmoving handle. I ran my hand over the cold metal, brushing away the dust. This wasn't just part of the foundation. This was a door, a vault. I called Maya over. She knelt beside me, her eyes tracing the same lines I had. "What is it?" "I don't know," I breathed. "A safe? A cellar?" We stared at it, the silence of the workshop pressing in. My grandfather. The man who had left us this ruin. Why would he have a vault hidden under his workshop floor? The condemnation notice, the back taxes, the story of a failed business. It didn't add up. You don't build a vault in the floor of a business you're running into the ground. A new feeling began to push through the exhaustion and the fear. It was a sharp, electrifying jolt of intrigue. Ms. Albright had given us a file. A paper trail to a dead end. But she was wrong. This wasn't a dead end. It was a locked door. And I was going to find a way to open it. The vault became our obsession. The cold, the hunger, the gnawing uncertainty about our future. All of it faded into the background, replaced by the singular focus on the rusted dial and the immovable handle. The first day was an exercise in brute force and frustration. We pulled on the handle together, our hands raw, our muscles straining until we were gasping for breath. It didn't move a millimeter. I tried to find a seam to pry at, but the steel was fit so perfectly into the concrete that I couldn't even wedge the tip of a screwdriver into it. The dial was the only interactive part. It was a standard combination lock, with numbers from 0 to 99. It was stiff with age and grime. I spent an hour just working it back and forth, trying to loosen it up, a fine red dust of rust coating my fingers. A million possible combinations. It was hopeless. Maybe there's a key? Maya suggested, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. It was a good thought. We spent the rest of the day searching. We went through the office desk again, drawer by drawer, sifting through mountains of paper. We found schematics for engines I didn't recognize, receipts for obscure parts, stacks of unpaid bills. No key. We searched the small living quarters, patting down the old mattress, looking in the pockets of a grease-stained jacket still hanging on a hook. Nothing. By the second day, a kind of methodical madness had set in. I decided to try logical combinations. Birthdays. I didn't know my grandfather's, but I tried my mom's. Nothing. I tried the address of the workshop. 141541. Nothing. I tried every significant date I could think of. The day our parents died. My birthday. Maya's birthday. The dial spun. The tumblers remained silent. The workshop grew colder as the sun went down. We huddled in the small back room, wrapped in the tarp, eating the last of the stale crackers we'd brought with us. The hunger was a dull ache in my stomach. Maybe it's not meant to be opened, Maya said quietly, her voice small in the darkness. Maybe he forgot the combination. No, I said, more to convince myself than her. You don't build something like this and then forget about it. The combination has to be here. Somewhere. The next morning, it was Maya who found it. She wasn't looking for it. She was just cold and bored. She'd been flipping through a thick, leather-bound book she'd found on a shelf in the office. It was a vehicle service ledger, its pages filled with my grandfather's neat, blocky handwriting. Records of oil changes, engine rebuilds, timing adjustments. 78 Ford F-150, 82 Chevy Camaro, on and on. She brought it over to me, where I was staring blankly at the vault. Look at this one, she said, pointing to an entry near the back. The entry was different from the others. It wasn't for a customer's car. The handwriting was the same, but it was more deliberate. It said, Project Phoenix, Final Calibration, October 28, 1998. Underneath, in parentheses, he had written, Remember the firing order. It was the date that caught my eye, October 28, 1998. Just a few weeks before my mom would have turned 21. It felt significant. But what was the firing order? I looked at Maya. She was looking at the ledger, then at the engine block hanging from the hoist in the center of the room. A thought sparked. What's the most common engine? I asked, my voice suddenly urgent. Maya, who had a surprising knack for random facts, didn't hesitate. A V8, she said, like in old muscle cars. What's the firing order for a classic V8? I asked. She frowned, thinking. I don't know. I think I saw it in one of those manuals. She ran to the office and came back with a heavy, grease-stained Chilton manual. She flipped through the pages. Here, she said, for a small block Chevy. It's 184367572. My heart was pounding. It was a sequence of numbers. A long shot, but it was more than we'd had for 3 days. I knelt by the dial. Remember the firing order. It wasn't a note about an engine. It was a clue. A mnemonic device. I took a deep breath. I spun the dial right, past 0 3 times, and stopped on the first number from the date. 10. Then left, past 10 once, and stopped on the second number. 28. Then right, to the last 2 digits of the year. 98. My hand was shaking. I grabbed the handle. I pulled. Nothing. My shoulders slumped. It was another dead end. Wait, Maya said, pointing at the Chilton manual.
The firing order. You didn't use it.
I looked at the sequence. 18436572. It was too many numbers for a standard combination. But what if? What if it wasn't the numbers themselves, but the sequence? I looked back at the vault. There were 8 small, almost invisible marks around the dial, like points on a compass. I hadn't even noticed them before. I tried again. I put my finger on the 1 mark, turned the dial to 10. Then I moved to the 8 mark and turned it to 28. Then to the 4 mark and turned it to 98. It was a crazy, convoluted sequence, a lock that only a mechanic would think of. I finished the sequence. My hand was slick with sweat. I grabbed the handle. I pulled. For a second, nothing happened. And then, with a deep, groaning shudder that vibrated through the concrete floor, something inside gave way. A loud, satisfying clunk echoed through the workshop. The handle moved. It actually moved. I looked at Maya, my eyes wide. She was grinning, a real, honest-to-God grin. I put both hands on the handle and pulled with everything I had. The heavy steel door was perfectly balanced on hidden hinges. It lifted upwards with surprising ease, revealing a dark, square opening in the floor. A wave of cool, dry air washed over us, smelling of old paper and sealed time. I shone my flashlight into the darkness. It was a small, concrete-lined chamber about 4 feet deep, and it was full. Stacked neatly inside were 5 metal ammunition boxes, the kind you see in army surplus stores. On top of the stack was a single, large, yellowed envelope. My name, Leo, was written on it in my grandfather's same blocky handwriting. My hands were trembling as I reached in and lifted it out. It was thick, heavy. I tore it open. Inside were 2 things. The first was a stack of money, old bills, 50s and 100s, bound with rubber bands that were so old they'd gone brittle. I didn't count it. It looked like more money than I had ever seen in my life. The second thing was a letter. Several pages, handwritten on lined paper. I unfolded it. The date at the top was October 28th, 1998. The day he'd calibrated Project Phoenix. The day he'd sealed this vault. Leo, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the worst has happened. But it also means you found this place, and for that, I am grateful. It means some small part of my plan worked. The money in this envelope is for you. It's enough for a clean start. Take your sister, go somewhere warm, and don't look back. Change your names, forget this place. That is the safest thing for you to do. I stopped reading, my blood running cold. Safest from what? I continued. But I know you might have my daughter's stubbornness in you. You might have questions. You might want to stay. If you do, know that this workshop, this land, it is not the worthless ruin it appears to be. It is the opposite. It is valuable, and there are people who will want to take it from you. They are the same people who took everything from me. The same people who, I fear, will one day come for your parents. I had to read that line 3 times. Come for your parents. The simple, tragic story of a car accident on a rainy night shattered into 1,000 pieces. This vault contains the whole story, the letter continued. And it contains the tools to fight back, if you choose that path. But I beg you, son, do not choose it lightly. The easy way is to take the money and run. I will not blame you for it. In fact, it is what I pray you will do. But if you must stay, if you must fight, know that you will be fighting for more than just a piece of land. You will be fighting for the truth. The choice is yours. God help you. Your grandfather, Robert. I lowered the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Maya was watching me, her face pale. Leo? What does it say? I looked from the letter to the money, to the dark opening in the floor with its other 4 boxes, its other secrets. My grandfather hadn't left us a ruin. He had left us a choice. A choice between a safe escape and a dangerous truth. And in that moment, I had no idea which one to make. The letter lay on the dusty workbench between us, a ghost's testament. The stack of cash sat next to it, a silent, heavy promise of an easier life. I read the letter again, and then a third time, the words burning themselves into my brain. Come for your parents. It wasn't a car accident. The neat, tidy tragedy that had defined our lives was a lie. A convenient story told to two small children who wouldn't ask questions. But I wasn't a child anymore. The revelation didn't land with a bang, but with a slow, creeping coldness that settled deep in my gut. It was the hollow feeling of the ground giving way beneath your feet. Every memory, every piece of our past, was now suspect. For years, I had carried the grief of their accident like a smooth, heavy stone. It was senseless, but it was simple. Now that stone had cracked open, revealing something ugly and complex inside. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. Anger at the liars, at the system that had processed us without a second thought, at the faceless people my grandfather wrote about. Who were they? Why did they want this place? Why would they hurt my parents over it? I looked at Maya. She was tracing the outline of a coffee stain on the workbench, her expression unreadable. She hadn't read the letter, but she'd heard the change in my voice. She knew something was wrong. It was a lie, I said, the words feeling foreign and heavy. About Mom and Dad. She looked up, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. What do you mean? I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. Not all of it. Not yet. The letter, it says things aren't what we were told. That this place, it's important and dangerous. I felt the weight of my grandfather's words. Take the money and run. It was a direct order from the only family I had left, even if he was just a voice on a page. It was the sensible thing to do. We could disappear. I could get a small apartment somewhere. Maya could go to a real school. We could have normal lives. We could be safe. I looked at the money. I'd never seen so much cash in one place. It was freedom. It was a ticket out of the cold, out of the hunger, out of the fear. All we had to do was close the vault, walk away, and never look back. But then my eyes drifted from the money to the workshop around me. The hulking shapes of the machinery, the neatly organized tools on the pegboards, the complex engine diagrams thumbtacked to the wall. This was my grandfather's world. He had built this place. He had hidden his secrets here. He had trusted me to find them. And my parents. If they hadn't died in an accident, then they had been taken from us. Their deaths weren't a tragedy. They were an injustice. Running away felt like letting the people responsible win. It felt like abandoning my parents all over again. The weight of the choice pressed down on me, suffocating. I was 17. What could I do against powerful, dangerous people? I couldn't even keep us warm. I couldn't even guarantee our next meal. I walked away from the workbench and stood in the center of the huge room, wrapping my arms around myself. The cold of the workshop seemed to seep into my soul. I was a kid, playing at being a man, and I was in over my head. The responsibility for Maya, for this legacy, for this truth, it was too much. A wave of pure, unadulterated panic washed over me. My breath hitched, my vision swam. I slid down the wall and sat on the cold concrete floor, pulling my knees to my chest. For the first time since we'd been kicked out, I felt the full force of our situation. We were two kids in a condemned building in the middle of nowhere, with a ghost's fortune and a secret that could get us killed. I put my head in my hands, and the despair I had been holding back for so long finally broke through. I cried. Not loud, sobbing cries, but silent, hot tears that tracked through the grime on my face. I cried for my parents, for the truth I never knew. I cried for my grandfather, a man I'd never met but whose impossible burden I now carried. I cried for Maya, for the childhood she'd lost. And I cried for myself, for the scared, stupid kid who had no idea what to do. Maya came and sat next to me, not saying a word. She just put her small, cold hand on my back. A simple, silent gesture of solidarity. We sat like that for a long time as the light outside began to fade. And in that shared silence, something inside me shifted. The panic receded, leaving behind a hard, cold clarity. The choice my grandfather had given me wasn't really a choice between running and fighting. It was a choice about who I was going to be. Was I going to be the person who ran from the truth, who took the easy way out and spent the rest of his life wondering? Or was I going to be the person who stood his ground, who fought for his family, who honored the sacrifice of the man who built this place? Was I going to be a victim of my past, or the master of my future? I lifted my head and looked at the vault, its dark mouth open in the floor. The choice was terrifying. But for the first time, it also felt simple. Running wasn't an option, not for me, not anymore. I want to pause the story here for a second. Because maybe you've been there. Maybe you've faced a moment so big it felt like no choice at all. A moment that was going to define everything that came after. It doesn't have to be a hidden vault and a family secret. It can be a decision to leave a bad situation, to start a new career, to stand up for something you believe in, even when it's scary. If you know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. Tell me about your vault moment, because that's what this community is about, sharing the stories of the moments that made us who we are. Now, let's get back to the workshop. The morning after my breakdown, the world felt different. The air in the workshop was still cold, but it no longer felt menacing. The dust and decay no longer looked like an ending. They looked like a beginning, a project. I had made my choice. Now I had to live with it. The first step was survival. We were almost out of food. I took 2 of the $100 bills from the stack. The old paper felt illicit and powerful in my hand. Stay here, lock the door behind me, I told Maya. Don't open it for anyone. She nodded, her expression serious. The fear was still in her eyes. But there was something else now, too. A glimmer of resolve that mirrored my own. The walk into town was different this time. I wasn't a lost kid anymore. I was a man on a mission, albeit a very young, very nervous one. The town of Coldwater Creek looked less like a ghost town in the daylight and more like a place that was simply tired. I found a small grocery store with a bell that jingled when I opened the door. The man behind the counter was old, his face a road map of wrinkles. He watched me with sharp, curious eyes as I loaded a basket with bread, peanut butter, canned soup, apples, and milk. When I went to pay, I handed him the $100 bill. He held it up to the light, his suspicion palpable. "Big bill for a kid," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Just moved into the old Miller place," I said, trying to sound casual. His eyebrows shot up. "Miller's? That place has been empty for 20 years. County's about to take it." "We're family," I said simply, trying to fix it up. He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, began to count out my change. "Robert Miller was a good man," he said, pushing the pile of bills and coins across the counter. "Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. The name's Peterson. If you need anything, you ask for me." It was a small gesture, but it felt huge. It was the first crack in the wall of our isolation. As I was walking out, a letter tacked to a community bulletin board caught my eye. It was a crisp, official-looking document with the county seal at the top. "Notice of public auction," the headline read, and underneath, the address, 1415 Old Timber Road. My stomach clenched. The date of the auction was December 15th. It was December 1st. We had 2 weeks. The reality of our situation came crashing back. My choice to stay and fight wasn't a philosophical one. It was a race against the clock. I hurried back to the workshop, the grocery bags banging against my legs. Just as I got to the turnoff for Old Timber Road, a sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize slowed as it passed me. The driver, a man in a sharp suit and sunglasses, looked me over with a cold, appraising stare before accelerating away. I didn't like the look of him. It felt like a predator sizing up its prey. When I got back, I found Maya had been busy. She had organized the cans of soup into a neat pyramid and was wiping down the surface of the main workbench with a damp rag. Seeing her do that, trying to make a home out of this ruin, solidified my resolve. We were going to save this place. That afternoon, the black sedan returned. It pulled right up our driveway, and the man in the suit got out. He was tall, with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Quite a project you've got here," he said, his voice smooth as oil. He gestured at the workshop. "My name is Mr. Vance. I represent a development group that's been acquiring land in this area." I stood in the doorway, blocking his entrance. "It's not for sale." His smile widened. "Oh, I think it might be. I've been in touch with the county. I know all about the back taxes, the condemnation order. It's a real mess. My group is prepared to make you a cash offer, right now, to take this liability off your hands." He named a number. It sounded big, but I had a feeling it was a fraction of what the land was actually worth. It was enough to get us a nice apartment, to start over. It was the easy way out, gift-wrapped and delivered to our door. It was my grandfather's first option. I thought about the notice in the grocery store. If we did nothing, the county would take the workshop, and this man would buy it at auction for pennies on the dollar. He was a vulture, circling. "Like I said," I repeated, my voice steady, "it's not for sale." For the first time, his smile faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Son, don't be a fool. You're two kids squatting in a wreck. In 2 weeks, you'll have nothing. I'm offering you a lifeline." "We don't need it," I said. He stared at me, his eyes cold and hard now. He was reassessing me, and he didn't like what he saw. He saw someone who wasn't going to roll over. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice losing its smooth veneer. He got back in his car, and the tires spat gravel as he sped away. The confrontation left me shaken, but also energized. The enemy now had a face. Mr. Vance. His development group. They were the people my grandfather had warned me about. That night, I opened the second ammo box. This one didn't contain money, it contained documents. A thick stack of them. There was a copy of the original deed to the property. There were tax assessments from 30 years ago, showing the land was valued at a surprisingly high number due to potential mineral rights, something the current county assessment conveniently ignored. And at the bottom, there was another letter, and a small, worn, leather-bound address book. "Leo," the new letter began, "if you have chosen to stay, then this is your first weapon. Information. The man who will come for this land will be working for a company called Apex Development. They are a front for the same people who ruined me. They will try to intimidate you and lowball you. Do not sell. The second weapon is counsel. In this address book, you will find a name, Elias Thorne. He is a lawyer in the city. He was my friend. I don't know if he is still practicing or even still alive, but if he is, you can trust him. Tell him you are Robert's grandson. Tell him you found Project Phoenix. He will understand. Use the cash from the first box to pay the back taxes immediately. It will stop the auction and buy you time. Be smart. Be careful. They will not play fair." I closed my eyes, a wave of gratitude washing over me. My grandfather hadn't just left me a choice. He had left me a plan. A lawyer. A strategy. I looked at the name in the book. Elias Thorne. It was time to make a phone call. The nearest working payphone was outside the gas station in town. It was an old, battered metal box, and I felt conspicuous standing there in the cold, feeding it quarter after quarter. The number for Elias Thorne, attorney at law, was listed in the city directory assistance. I dialed, my heart hammering against my ribs. What if he wasn't there? What if he didn't remember? The phone rang 4 times, and I was about to hang up when a gruff, elderly voice answered. Thorne. Yes, I stammered. I'm looking for Mr. Elias Thorne. You found him, the voice grumbled. What do you want? My name is Leo, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm Robert Miller's grandson. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he'd hung up. Then, the voice came back, softer now, laced with something that sounded like astonishment. Robert's grandson. My God. I thought, after his daughter, I thought there was no one left. There's me and my sister, Maya, I said. We're at his workshop. At the workshop, he sounded alarmed. Is it safe? I don't know, I admitted. I found the vault. I found your name. I found something called Project Phoenix. Another silence, longer this time. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. Listen to me very carefully, son, he said, his voice low and urgent. Don't talk to anyone else about this. Don't let anyone in that building. A man named Vance, from Apex Development, has been filing inquiries about that property for months. He's a shark. I need you to come to my office, tomorrow. Bring the deed, bring the tax notice, and bring whatever your grandfather wrote about Phoenix. Can you do that? Yes, I said, I can do that. Good lad, he said. Robert was my best friend, and they did him wrong. They did his whole family wrong. It's about time someone made it right. I hung up the phone, a profound sense of relief washing over me. We weren't alone anymore. We had an ally. The next morning, I took the first bus back to the city. I left Maya with a stockpile of canned soup, a heavy wrench to brace the door, and a strict set of instructions not to open it for anyone. Leaving her was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was necessary. Elias Thorne's office was in an old, stately building downtown that had seen better days. The office itself was cluttered with books and precarious stacks of paper, smelling of old leather and pipe tobacco. Thorne was a mountain of a man, even sitting down, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were still sharp and intelligent behind thick glasses. He looked me over as I stood in his doorway. You have his eyes, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. Roberts. Come in, son. Sit down. I spent the next 2 hours telling him everything. About being kicked out, about finding the workshop, the vault, the letters, the money. About Mr. Vance. I laid the documents from the ammo box on his desk. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, his expression growing more grim with each detail. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. Apex Development, he said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. They're a subsidiary of a larger corporation, a ruthless one. They've been buying up land with potential mineral or water rights all over the state for years, using predatory tactics. Your grandfather was a brilliant mechanic, Leo, a genius, really. But he was also an inventor. Project Phoenix was his masterpiece. He explained that my grandfather had developed a highly efficient, low-emission carburetor system. It was decades ahead of its time. He'd patented it, hoping to license it and secure his family's future. A major automotive parts company, the parent of Apex, got wind of it. They didn't want to license it, they wanted to bury it. It would have disrupted their entire business model. They made him an offer, Thorne said, his voice low. He refused. So they decided to ruin him. They used a bad loan he'd co-signed for a friend as leverage. They called in debts. They blacklisted him with suppliers. They bled him dry. They thought he would break and sell them the patent for pennies. But they underestimated Robert. He was a fighter. He explained that my grandfather, realizing he was going to lose everything, orchestrated his own ruin. He let the business fail. He had the workshop condemned on a technicality to devalue it on paper. He started hiding his money, converting it to cash, and building the vault. He created the illusion of a broken man with nothing left, so they would stop looking. The workshop wasn't his failure. It was his fortress. He was trying to protect the patent, Thorne said. And more than that, he was trying to protect your mother. He was afraid they would come after her to get to him. And they had. Thorne believed, as I now did, that my parents' accident was no accident. It was a message, a final, brutal act to sever the family line and clear the way for them to eventually claim the land and anything on it. The first order of business was the property. Thorne made a call to the county tax office. He was fierce and commanding on the phone. I took a taxi to the county seat, walked in with a certified check drawn from an account Thorne had helped me open that morning, and paid the entire decade of back taxes, plus penalties. The clerk who took my money looked at me like I was an alien. The foreclosure was stopped. The auction was canceled. The property was ours, free and clear. When I got back to the workshop late that night, the relief on Maya's face was so profound, it almost brought me to my knees. We were safe. For now. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. With Thorne guiding us, we began the slow process of resurrection. We had the condemnation order reviewed. It turned out to be based on a fraudulent report, likely paid for by Apex. We hired a local contractor, a gruff but honest man named Hank, to inspect the building. "Good bones," Hank said, tapping on a main support beam. "Roof's a mess, needs new wiring, but she's solid. Your granddad built this place to survive a war." We started making it livable. Hank and his team fixed the roof. We had the electricity turned back on. For the first time, we could flip a switch and light flooded the cavernous space. It felt like a miracle. I spent my days working alongside Hank's crew, learning how to patch drywall, run wire, and fix plumbing. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying. With every nail I hammered, I felt like I was rebuilding not just a workshop, but my own life. The community in Coldwater Creek began to thaw. Mr. Peterson from the grocery store would slip an extra loaf of bread into our bags. The waitress at the town's only diner would send us home with leftover pie. They were watching us. They saw two kids not just surviving, but working, building, and they approved. We weren't just the ghosts in the Miller place anymore. We were Leo and Maya. We were becoming part of the town. With the immediate threat of losing the workshop gone, and the slow, steady work of repair underway, a new routine settled over us. The days were filled with physical labor, the nights with a quiet sense of purpose. But the biggest secrets were still locked away. There were 3 more ammo boxes in the vault. One evening, after a long day of helping Hank's crew replace the last of the rotten window frames, Maya and I decided it was time to open the next one. This box was heavier than the others. I lifted it out and set it on the clean workbench. When I opened the latches, the contents took my breath away. It wasn't full of documents or money. It was full of memories. There were stacks of photographs, dozens of them, held together with crumbling rubber bands. The first one I picked up was of a young woman with a bright, fearless smile and the same dark eyes as Maya. She was standing in front of the workshop, her arm around a tall, handsome man with grease on his cheek. My mother and father. I had so few pictures of them. Here was a treasure trove. Pictures of them on a picnic, at a county fair, working on a car together. Pictures of my mother pregnant with me, and then pictures of them holding a tiny, bundled baby. Me. I felt a lump form in my throat. I handed a picture of our mom to Maya. She took it reverently, her fingers tracing our mother's smiling face. "She was beautiful," Maya whispered. Underneath the photos were more personal items. My mother's high school diploma. My father's honorable discharge papers from the army. A small silver locket containing a microscopic picture of my parents on their wedding day. And at the very bottom, a set of journals. They were my grandfather's. I opened the first one. The entries were dated, starting almost 30 years ago. They were a chronicle of his fight. He wrote about his initial excitement for Project Phoenix, his pride in his invention. Then, the entries grew darker. He wrote about the first meeting with the corporation, the veiled threats. He wrote about his friend, the one who'd taken the bad loan, being driven to bankruptcy and despair. "They're not businessmen," one entry read. "They are predators. They don't create, they only consume." He detailed every step he took to protect his family. He wrote about selling off his best equipment to friends he trusted, asking them to hold it for him. He wrote about building the vault late at night, pouring the concrete himself. He wrote about his growing fear for my mother, who was young and in love and didn't understand the danger. "She thinks I'm paranoid," he wrote. "She thinks I'm letting the business fail out of pride. How do I tell her that I'm destroying my life's work just to keep her safe?" The journals were a testament to a hidden, lonely war. He had fought it completely alone, bearing the weight of his family's safety on his shoulders, even accepting their misunderstanding and scorn as part of the price. The final box we opened that night contained the heart of it all. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a metal object about the size of a shoebox. It was a marvel of intricate brass fittings, polished steel, and copper tubing. It was Project Phoenix. The carburetor. Beside it were the original patent documents, blueprints, and testing data. It was the legacy. The reason for everything. The source of all our pain and all our hope. Reading those journals, seeing those photos, holding that invention in my hands, I finally understood. My grandfather wasn't just a name on a legal document. He was a hero. He had sacrificed his reputation, his life's work, and his relationship with his own daughter to give us a fighting chance. And my parents, they weren't careless. They were victims, caught in a battle they didn't even know was being fought. The anger I had felt was replaced by a deep, profound sadness and an even deeper sense of duty. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about honor. It was about restoring a story that had been deliberately broken. I looked at Maya, who was carefully arranging the photographs of our parents on the workbench. I looked at the workshop around us, no longer a ruin but a sanctuary, every beam and tool a part of our story. I thought about the scared kid who had arrived here a few months ago, with nothing but a trash bag and a desperate hope. He was gone. In his place was a young man who had a home, a purpose, and a family legacy to protect. Inheritance, I realized, wasn't something you were given. It was something you claimed. It wasn't about the money in the vault or the deed to the land. It was about the strength, the resilience, the stubborn, unyielding love that had been passed down to us through the choices and sacrifices of those who came before. It was about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. My grandfather had made that choice. Now, I had made it too. The fight wasn't over. I knew Apex Development wouldn't just give up. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. This was our home. This was our story. And we were ready to fight for it. The months that followed were a testament to the power of slow, steady work. Spring arrived in Coldwater Creek, and with it, a sense of renewal that felt mirrored in our own lives. The snow melted, revealing the green shoots of grass in the muddy yard. The trees that had looked like skeletons now budded with new leaves. The workshop, once a dark and cold tomb, was now filled with light and the sounds of life. We had replaced all the windows, and the afternoon sun would stream in, illuminating the clean, organized space. Hank and his crew had finished their work, leaving us with a building that was not only sound, but also felt cared for. The small back room was now a proper living space, with 2 comfortable beds, a small kitchenette, and a table where Maya did her schoolwork. Elias Thorne had helped us enroll her in the local school, and after a few shy weeks, she started making friends. I saw a lightness in her that had been absent for years. The weight of our nomadic, uncertain life was finally lifting from her shoulders. For my part, I found my purpose inside the workshop itself. I spent hours poring over my grandfather's manuals and journals. His notes were meticulous, his passion for mechanics evident on every page. I started tinkering. I began with small things, cleaning and restoring his old tools. Then I moved on to the small engines for lawn mowers and generators that locals started bringing by, hearing that the Miller kid had a knack for it. My first paying customer was Mr. Peterson from the grocery store. He brought in a sputtering chainsaw, and after 2 days of work, following a diagram in my grandfather's notes, I got it running smoother than it had in years. He paid me $20 and a bag of groceries. It was the best money I had ever earned. Elias Thorne, meanwhile, was waging our war on the legal front. He filed a countersuit against Apex Development, citing a history of predatory practices and presenting the evidence of the fraudulent condemnation. He also reopened the investigation into my parents' accident, presenting the theory of foul play to a skeptical but intrigued district attorney. It was a long shot, but it put Apex on the defensive. They had wanted a quick and quiet acquisition. Now they were embroiled in a messy, public legal battle with the ghost of Robert Miller. One day, Mr. Vance showed up again. This time, he didn't get out of his car. He just parked at the end of the driveway, watching me work. I was tuning up an old tractor for a local farmer, the big garage doors wide open to the spring air. I didn't acknowledge him. I just kept working, my hands steady, my focus on the engine in front of me. After a long time, he drove away. It was a small victory, but it felt immense. I had stood my ground, and the vulture had retreated. The final ammo box remained in the vault. We both knew what we had to do with it. One Saturday, Thorne drove out from the city. We sat around the workbench, the three of us, and laid out the contents of the last box. The patent, the blueprints, the working prototype of Project Phoenix. "The patent is still valid," Thorne said, his voice filled with a lawyer's quiet excitement. "Robert renewed it just before he died, through a holding company I set up for him. The technology is still viable, more viable than ever in today's world." He explained our options. We could sell it. A different, more ethical company had already expressed interest after Thorne had made some discreet inquiries. The offer was substantial. It would be enough to set us up for life, comfortably. Or we could try to build it ourselves. Start a small company, right here in the workshop, just as my grandfather had intended. "Selling is the safe bet," Thorne said, looking at me. "Building is the dream. It's a much harder road." I looked at Maya. I looked at my grandfather's inventions sitting on the bench he had built. I thought of his journals, of his lonely fight. Selling it felt like finishing his story on someone else's terms. Building it, that felt like continuing it. "We build it," I said, without a moment's hesitation. Maya grinned. Thorne simply nodded, a look of immense pride on his old face. "I thought you might say that," he said. "Your grandfather would be proud, Leo. He would be so damn proud." So here we are. It's been a year since we first set foot in this place. The workshop is alive again. The main bay is a functioning business, Miller and Son Mechanics, though for now, it's just me. We specialize in engine repair and custom modifications. In the evenings, I work on Project Phoenix, slowly, meticulously sourcing the parts to build a second prototype. The legal battle with Apex is ongoing, but the tide has turned in our favor. The town of Coldwater Creek has embraced us. We are no longer outsiders. We are home. Sometimes, I stand in the middle of the workshop at night, after Maya is asleep, and I just listen to the silence. It's not an empty silence anymore. It's a silence full of history, of sacrifice, and of promise. I think about that scared 17-year-old kid on the curb, holding a meaningless piece of paper. He thought he had nothing, but he was wrong. He had a sister who trusted him. He had the legacy of a grandfather who believed in him. And he had a choice. Our lives are not defined by the bad things that happen to us. They are not defined by the systems that fail us or the people who wrong us. Our lives are defined by the choices we make in the darkness. They are defined by what we choose to build in the ruins. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This story, in the end, isn't about a hidden vault or a secret invention. It's about what inheritance really means. It's not about the money or property you're left with. It's about the strength, the courage, and the love that are passed down, often in ways we can't see. It's about finding a foundation where you thought there was only rubble. If our story has resonated with you, if it's made you think about your own foundations, please consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, share your own story in the comments below. Tell us about a time you chose to build instead of run. Tell us about the inheritance that truly matters in your life. I promise you, I will read every single one. Because in the end, we're all just trying to find our way home. And we don't have to do it alone.